So this is a picture of our family, of our clan, the Schroeder clan, circa about 1980. I'm in the back there standing on quite a few boxes to be anywhere near as tall as my brother and my uncle on either side of me. This cute little, whoops, can we go back? No. The red button, thank you. Let me try to get this together. The cute little blonde-haired moppet is my sister Kate, and the younger lady sitting right in front of her is our cousin Teresa. This family is why we're here today. Since this picture was taken, there are 2 more first cousins that weren't even a twinkle in anybody's eye, and 2 more generations of our Schroeder clan. We now number, including spouses and partners, over 70 individuals. And they're why we're here today. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about my lipedema journey and my story. I really thought that I was a diet failure. I grew up as a pretty active kid and did a lot of things like motorcycle riding, and I was a twirler in grade school. Some of our slides are a little bit out of order here, but I also did a lot of dance. Back again. Did a lot of dance. And I was never the skinniest kid, but by the time I was a teenager, I had been put on diets. I was told that I was dumpy. My dance teachers, complained about my thunder thighs and said, I was using my front muscles instead of my back muscles to raise my leg. I wasn't, but I was actually showing the beginnings of lipedema there. So I started dieting in my teens, and it was hard. I was always on a diet. It never seemed to work. And so I was constantly dieting, yo-yoing up and down. As a kid, I was covered in bruises. Sound familiar? Definitely the hypermobility really was helpful as a dancer. I mean, I could do the splits like nobody else. But as I went forward, it became a bigger issue. Again, something up with our slides here. But at one point in my life, I started really gaining weight and not being able to take it off. You can see just here, my little slippered foot. That was immediately after I had my first child. I was really retaining a lot of fluid, was really blown up. I lost some weight, I gained it back. At one point, which is pretty well represented in this picture, I had hit 255 pounds on this short little frame. And at that point, I was deathly afraid of dying. I had kids that were still in high school. I had a lot to live for, but I was afraid. So I found an endocrinologist who helped me lose some weight. In fact, I lost about 65 pounds, as you can see in this picture of me in a polka dot dress. This endocrinologist identified my thyroid issues and got me on some medication for that, which was super helpful, but I lost that 65 pounds and I really hit a wall. It didn't seem to matter how many exercise classes I went to at the gym, or how little I was eating, or how much protein or not. I just couldn't lose any more weight. And as you can see in this picture of me in the polka dot dress, my arms were straining at the sleeves. I lost a lot of weight in my upper body, which you can see, but not other parts of my body. So I really considered myself a diet failure. You know, here I'd done this 65 pounds, it was great, and I had more mobility, and I could go to exercise classes, but I just couldn't get as far as I wanted to go. My husband and our kids lived in the Seattle area for about 20 years, and that's where I did lose this weight. But we relocated back to our hometown of St. Louis, Missouri during the pandemic. And I'm really sorry about these. I heard an article on the St. Louis National Public Radio as I was running errands. And all I remembered hearing was that there was this thing where women could not lose weight, or they lost weight, but they never lost it out of their legs or arms. And I was establishing a new relationship with a primary care provider since we had just relocated. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I went ahead and got on the web, went to the St. Louis National Public Radio site, found the article, and it turns out that the person speaking was Dr. Wright. And I was able to read a transcript of that interview, and I was even more sure that, wow, this is me. So many things that were described sounded like me. And in the National Public Radio's website, they linked the Milken Institute's Giving Better Guide to Lipedema, which was an amazing introduction to this disorder, and really kind of gave me a big picture understanding of what was going on. And then they also linked this PRS Global Open paper on lipedema about being a common disease with not great diagnosis. From those two pieces of information, I started reading a bunch of other studies and Lipedema Foundation supported information. And I took all of these links, sent them to my primary care provider, and said to her, hey, we've got an appointment coming up. We've already talked once about my desire to lose weight, but I think this is me. So when I went to that appointment, she had done her due diligence. She went through all of the material, actually discussed it with the rest of her staff, because she's a nurse practitioner. She wanted to verify with the physicians in the practice. And when I came in, she said, yeah, we all think you have lipedema. I've observed you. You resemble this information. So she was able to refer me to somebody at Washington University in St. Louis in the physical therapy department there who had expertise in lipedema and lymphedema, in particular to help start reducing the swelling that I had. Then she also referred me to Dr. Wright. So I was on my journey. So I went from thinking I was a diet failure to knowing that I had a condition that had some very specific ways of being treated. And one of the things I realized is that I needed to tell my story to that big Schroeder clan. There are a lot of women in our family. In fact, thinking about our grandchildren, there are only, in the first cousins, there are only 5 boys, I think. And in the next generation, like my kids and Kate's kids, there are 2 boys, so, 4 boys. So it's mostly women. And I wanted to convince my family that lipedema was a real thing. And not just, oh, Connie, she's failed at dieting over all this time, and now she's got this new crazy idea about what it is. I really wanted to say this is something, and it's in the family. I wanted to share my own story because that was the way I was getting support, and I wanted to really be sure to share factual information because my introduction to lipedema was through all of those things that I showed you before, the different reports and things. I really had this factual mindset, not a, oh, I think, oh, I've heard mindset. And our family was connected. We were connected either on Facebook or Instagram, which I used for all of my posts. I also have a background in adult education, and I knew if I combined my story with factual information, the engagement about me as a family member would be there and open people's ears to the factual information. So this was one of my early posts. That is my inelastic compression wrapped legs. One of the first posts I did, it was my most vulnerable post because it was when I actually told a huge number of people, and frankly open on Instagram, about lipedema and what I was going through. I also showed some of the other treatments I was having, like using my FlexiTouch pump to make sure that I was pumping every night and wearing the compression during the day. I found great illustrations. I'm not an artist, but great illustrations of what lipedema is, and said, hey, this is me. Take another look, and they could follow that post into somebody else's Instagram account and see what was going on. I talked also about a lot of other things, like hypermobility. Yeah, this is our family sign. How far can you get your thumb to your wrist? About the fact that lipedema affects people with different body shapes. It wasn't just this body shape that was affected with lipedema, but for, like my sister Kate, who's got a more lean body shape, who's also affected with lipedema, and touched on things like the emotional issues. You know, having thought I was a diet failure for 30, 40 years before I got diagnosed with lipedema, that takes a toll on your psyche. And I'm still working through a lot of that in therapy right now. I also shared successes. This was one of my first fabulous successes, a non-scale victory, as you might call them. Yeah, I know. So these, I'm wearing inelastic compression, a second set. So this is about a year after that first post. And these boots that I'm wearing had a elastic gusset in the back about this wide. But I was in them and there was room, and that was amazing. Since then, I've had those boots taken in, the elastic gusset about this wide, and now I actually have to have the gusset taken out for next year. So amazing. I also talked about, as I approached surgery, really talking about why it's so challenging to get a diagnosis. And again, as you can see, I reposted information from accounts that I had researched and found that were reliable and using evidence-based descriptions of lipedema and the lipedema journey. Then as I went forward, oops, no, this one. As I went through surgery, I showed different images of my surgery. The first image that isn't showing here was actually a video that Dr. Wright did of my very first surgery. I showed some pictures of recovery and how that was going. And I showed this picture, was after my lower leg surgery, just talking a little bit about some of the things I used to help ease the bruising. But after this particular post, it really hit a chord. I got a lot of pings from family and friends wanting to know more about my journey through lipedema. And I did a whole series of posts talking about the physical effects, talking about my mental health process, talking about what was still coming, because this was just after I had essentially all the lowers done. And again, a suggestion, encouragement for people to go ahead and take a look. If you think you are out of balance, if you think you are disproportionate, take a look at this information because it may help you. I know a lot of us with lipedema suddenly become lipedema diagnosis people, right? You walk through the airport and you're going to be like, but really, we can't tell, right? There's so many different symptoms, diseases that can mimic what we see as lipedema. But I wanted to make sure that people knew this is where you can get some really great information. Post-surgery, I did, even more posts there. You can see this post, when I was in the blue tights, that's when I was at about 250 pounds. And then my legs, after I had had quite a few months of healing after all of my lower surgery. And it was amazing to wake up and look at my legs in the morning before I pulled my compression on and went, hey, I like those legs. They're pretty good. Yeah. After surgery, I continue to post different things that encourage people to kind of look at lipedema from the big picture, using, again, very specific accounts who describe better than I could on my own some of the trials and tribulations of lipedema. And through all of this, we really my family started talking. So we're going to hear next from my cousin, Teresa. And can we get sound on this video, please?
It was a very eye-opening year for my health and education. My early years, about 10, I had an interest in fitness. And then when I was 12, my family and I moved to St. Louis from North Dakota, where we were at, to be closer to immediate family. We had a dog that I would take for walks around the neighborhood and explore, and I would walk past a woman about every day who I think was in her 20s, and she had a large bottom and legs. Being a tween at the time and curious about body types, part of me wondered, how did that woman get those kind of proportions? I realize now she probably has lipedema 4 or 5. I was an awkward person and subject to my own judgment, and I was kind of wondering why I didn't look like the 1990s supermodels at the time. Time progressed, as did my fitness level, and I got a little taller, and curves came in when they were supposed to. In college, I had an accident involving a head injury, and I gained weight. I went to dietitians, I joined the Y. I give the dietitians like what I was eating and what I was exercising at, and the best answer I could get was, this is weird, you should be losing weight. About this time, I noticed a few other female cousins that had gained weight right about the same time I did, so I thought, well, I guess this is just something in our genes. At age 25, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and that comes with insulin resistance. The advice I got at the time was I would just have to white knuckle the carb cravings and eat low carb. And I just was not down for it. My exercise had fallen off a lot, and I didn't want to not eat my carbs. So I accepted I was going to be a roly-poly girl, and I embraced the frumpy and expensive clothes that didn't feel really good, and they didn't look very professional. And I said goodbye to my cute clothes in my younger years. Fast forwarding, the 2020s was a wonderful time of advocacy and acceptance of larger bodies. And while I envy the younger set who could wear belly shirts and tighter clothes, I had come to accept that I've been the same weight for 20 plus years. Then my cousin Connie started to share her journey with lipedema. I was intrigued as Connie presented all the information she was learning and talking about different things she was experiencing on social media. I read the material that Connie put out, and I had noticed years ago that I had lumps and bumps under my skin, and I wrote them off as displaced fat from ranch dressing or alien implants. Just kidding. I was approaching 50, and I had some aches and pains from inflammation, or so I thought. I did not think I qualified for this diagnosis of lipedema as I was not hypermobile. In 2024, I went to Connie's specialist and I had an evaluation. Apparently I do have lipedema and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and that's where my muscle aches and pains were coming from. My roly-poly body was from, as you probably know, the inability of lymph to move fat through the body, and it turned into scar tissue. After years of resistance, I went low carb and I lost weight for the first time in my adult life. I started taking the suggested supplements and felt this weird thing called energy and less fatigue. And I was very grateful for that. I would have never thought about lipedema at all if it had not been for Connie posting on Facebook and Instagram about her personal story, what I thought was a collection of a head injury, PCOS, and some other diagnoses I picked up through the years. Lipedema sliced through a lot of that for corresponding aches and pains and inability. Eating less inflammatory foods and wearing compression has also helped me feel so much better. Very grateful for my family and social media, as well as the Fat Disorders Resource Society for doing research that's being done. Thank you so much for your time and hearing my story about lipedema. It's a family affair. Good morning.
And this is forward, backward. Okay. Well, thank you to Teresa and to Connie. So I'm Kate Eddens. I'm the youngest sister of Connie. And I want to start out by saying that I'm also a researcher. I'm a scientist in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at Indiana University. But as a disclaimer, I have done no research on lipedema. That's part of what I would like to be a part of my future. I'm also very nervous because while I speak at scientific conferences all the time, I have never talked about anything personal. So if I'm a little anxious and I have a couple notes to refer to just in case I lose where I am, please forgive me. So I was a sickly kid. I'm sure Connie can attest to that as well. And for context too, Connie is 14 years older than me. So our spread in our family is 14 years wide. I had a lot of antibiotics treatments. I had a lot of skin reactions. I had to have IV iron because I was so anemic. And it's kind of hard to tell, but I tried to put that, this photo where I just look kind of pale and my pediatrician, I was there so often, he said to me, you know, you're a real Sarah Bernhardt. And of course, I had no idea who that was. Apparently, she was a silent film star who was very dramatic. And so from that young age, I was already being told, you're just over dramatic, you know, you're in here all the time, but I'm at the hospital getting IV iron. And I was looking through, my mom saved all my notes from my pediatrician, which is amazing, but I was looking through and I had dislocations at that point too, where there was a note where my brother had hugged me too tight and I got nursemaid's elbow, which later on my daughter actually had that when she was young as well. And I see, yes, that the animations aren't working on our slides, but I was trying to point out that here are some kids with, I decided to use the term standard, because I know we probably don't want to say normal, standard legs, and then here's me, like with these tiny little sticks and the bow legs, and I just, I was just built different. So as I got older as well, I had a lot of hypermobility, as Connie already showed, our family gang sign. I was the kid in acrobats who did the solo, because I would do this like stand, with just my chin on the floor, my body up. I would constantly just be like watching TV, and I'd sit there and have like my feet over my eyes, like from around back, and like cover my mouth and stuff. So very hypermobile. I had a lot of gastrointestinal issues. I have probably, if I could get all the time back that I have spent in the bathroom my entire life, it would be like a second lifetime. And that continues. I had walking pneumonia all the time. I mean, this was a regular occurrence. I have Halloween photos. I couldn't find where you can tell I'm sick. In this picture, it's hard to see, but this was at my 7th grade confirmation over here. And I had to throw up in the back of the church and at the restaurant beforehand because I had pneumonia at the time, and I was swallowing all the infection. I also had the growing pains that were really painful. I had tics and compulsions, so I had a lot of facial tics. I had a gulping thing. I just always, they would kind of shift, and my parents would get really mad at me, stop gulping when you're drinking. And I see this in my children too now. A lot of impulsivity and hyperactivity. So my nickname was Motor Mouth because I never stopped talking. My other nickname was I Knew That because, looking back on it, I think this was probably a tic. I would ask questions, of my parents or something, and they would tell me the answer, and then I'd go, I knew that. But I think it ended up being kind of one of my tics as well. As I got older, this was interesting to me too, because I hit puberty, and on these photos on the left-hand side, I'm probably 14, 15, and I started my period at age 12, so I'd already been in puberty for a bit, but I wasn't really showing signs so much of lipedema yet, I don't think. But I was having all of these other issues. Again, the GI issues were even worse. I was diagnosed with an ulcer. I was diagnosed with GERD. I had a lot of substance use and impulsivity, and that was getting worse. I was getting in legal trouble, stealing cars from my parents' cars, but running them into the side of a gas station, trying to hide it. Really, I was a mess. I know, I see the faces. I had very heavy, painful periods. I gained some weight. I had some pretty intense emotional and physical trauma that happened when I was 14, 15. And after that, I think I really began to gain more of the weight, more substance abuse, although it started before that. I was always active in sports. I played field hockey, tennis, I danced, always. I was constantly busy. I did plays, I did really well in school, so, things like ADHD are often misdiagnosed or never diagnosed in girls, and especially if you happen to do well in school. But I would do a thing, and this continued through college, where I would do really well one semester, and then another semester I would kind of blow it off and not do as well, and then I would freak out and then get my act together to bring things back up. But in this time too in high school, I remember doing a barium swallow, having an EKG where they found a bit of a heart murmur, and I have this photo on the right-hand side in my great Budweiser swimsuit from St. Louis, so it just happens. But you can see that I'm starting to have more potential, like evidence of lipedema in the legs. But even when I was young, I remember, like, as soon as I hit puberty, I couldn't wear my friends' clothes. It was like I went from being a child to being a size 8 and a waist to hip ratio that was different than my friends, you know? And I would be like, why can't I wear Paige's size 4 jeans, you know? It had like holes cut out in it, and my body was just like pouring out of the holes as I was trying, but it was just different. And from then on, I had a lot of disordered eating and yo-yo diets. So on this kind of, the two far left photos was my senior year of high school, and I was restricting calories so severely and over-exercising, I couldn't find a good photo, but my face was really gaunt. But you can see that my legs were still my legs. And this went on all through my 20s and college, of this yo-yo dieting. I would gain and lose, more signs of this executive dysfunction. I had a doctor that I was working with in college say to me, I think I showed him that, you know, at the time I could bend my finger back almost to actually touch the back of my hand. And he said, well, you probably have some kind of connective tissue disorder. But he wasn't my doctor, I was working with him. All of this got worse, the GI stuff too, and I ended up eventually going to rehab for my substance use issues. And there I was diagnosed too with anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, like everything, just they gave me the whole bag. I also had a pretty terrible TMJ, and in college and at times I was experimenting with things like I would eat vegan for a while, I would eat macrobiotic for a while, I would, then, and throughout my 20s and 30s, animation didn't work, but that's okay. I would, doing low carb and eating, less sugar would often help, but then my roommate would find me hiding in a corner in the kitchen eating baker's chocolate. So I was like binge eating along with this restriction. And even when, I'm really fit in these photos, I was going to the gym like 2 hours a day, really focusing on protein, building muscle. I was super strong, but you can still see that I would have the arms, and my leg size was still different. So I didn't, again, understand why that couldn't change. My job was also really active in my 20s, and then when I got into my 30s, I went back to school, I went to graduate school, I was sitting all the time, my work was in front of a computer. I quit smoking, which was a big change in how my body reacted to everything as well. I was diagnosed with celiac, which I still don't know. Now I actually wonder, I don't know if I have celiac because I think it's probably an MCAS, but so I haven't eaten gluten in 19 years. So when I was 30, I stopped eating gluten, and it was life-changing, night and day, overnight, to the point where the doctor had done a blood test, and I had the antibodies, and she said, well, for the gold standard, we'd have to go in and do a biopsy, but you have to eat gluten for 2 weeks. And I was like, nope, I'm not doing it. I'm not going back, because it was that drastic of a change for me. So at 30, I'd stopped eating gluten. I then could see how more foods made me feel, and so I cut out dairy. I cut out meat. That's, for me, it's an animal-related decision. I choose not to eat meat. I had periods of eating raw, and interestingly enough, when I was just eating like raw fruits and vegetables, I had the best iron. I had the least amount of anemia that I'd ever had. And I don't know if that was maybe just a reduced inflammation. I don't know, maybe someone will have some insight there. But I continued to do a lot of sports. This is me with my daughter after a triathlon. And you can see what we call the Eddens knees. If you lined up my mom and Connie and I and our sisters, we all have the exact same knees. We call them the Eddens knees. And I think that this is also a sign of the lipedema in our family. I ended up going to Overeaters Anonymous because I was already doing other Anonymous. So it was helpful in helping me kind of regulate what I ate as well. But then getting pregnant, I had someone explain to me once that when you are hypermobile and you get pregnant, you're like this giraffe toy that you push on the bottom, and it was true. I could move my ribs around. I fell a lot. I'd sprain my ankle in pregnancy. I hated being pregnant. I had a friend of mine tell me my feet looked like hobbit feet. When she came in, I was pregnant in St. Louis in the summer, which if any of you who live there, it's miserable, like 200% humidity. Really had a lot of swelling. And I also first noticed Raynaud's symptoms in my nipples from breastfeeding. And so that was kind of one of the first times that I noticed some Raynaud's as well. Just putting together more pieces of the puzzle, I started, as I still couldn't, I'd go up and down with my weight. I would make deals with myself about what I could do if I just lost the weight, right? And then I finally was like, you know what, I'm just gonna get tattoos so I don't have to, so like at least my arms look pretty to me, which you all can debate prettiness in my tattoos. I like them. But I did a yoga teacher training, so this is me, still with all of the lipedema fat on my arms, but using some of my hypermobility, not realizing that I was heading more towards injury. And this was the first time I tore a rotator cuff in CrossFit, and really had a worsening joint pain all over my body. Because I had not been eating meat and I had not been eating soy because of my hypothyroid, so I'd been diagnosed hypothyroid, but I ate soy and I had this reaction on my lips where they were swelled up and were weeping, and learned I had a soy allergy, which has also gotten worse with diarrhea and vomiting as well. Anyway, and fatigue and all that good stuff. The last thing I'll talk about here before being sort of diagnosed was that I did carb cycling, and this was the time when I really felt like I was strongest, and I felt strongest, and I felt good about how I was eating and how my body felt. And it was, I'd do like 2 days low carb, and it was a whole intricate program, really hard to maintain. But with cardio and weight and intermittent fasting in it. But I felt good. And even when I stopped doing the carb cycling, when I stuck with that intermittent fasting, I kept my weight down for a couple of years. Then I tore another rotator cuff, and I was less active, and I began to gain much more. I also at this time was traveling internationally for work and had experienced swelling in my lower legs that would not come down even as I'm doing my legs up the wall there. This is just showing I have all kinds of great, underneath here are other kind of symptoms of potentially what I have not been formally diagnosed with MCAS, but I react to everything. this is swelling in my knuckles and fingers that spread. They did a blood test this time, and I didn't have rheumatoid or inflammatory markers, which is puzzling. I don't know what else is in here. Sorry, excuse me. But anyway, to get to where Connie had this post on Instagram, and then I think she had sent me something about lipedema, and I said, you know what, but I don't feel these nodules, so I don't really know if I have that. And then time would go on, and I, she sent me the links to Dr. Wright's videos and her surgery, and I watched those, and I was really happy for her that she had that diagnosis. And then she had recommended, after I had traveled, I said, did you notice the nodules more after you lost weight? You know, I feel like things are different, and I'm entering perimenopause at this point. I was like 41 to 44 in that area. And so I start asking Connie more and more questions. And she's given me incredibly wonderful, thoughtful answers and links, as Connie does, scientific-based. And she knows I'm a scientist, so, but that's how she would provide them to everyone. So I finally got an intake call with Dr. Wright's office, and even before then, at that time, I think Connie had recommended, you might start trying compression. And so by the time I'd actually got to St. Louis, because I live in Indiana, to meet with Dr. Wright, I'd already been wearing compression for a couple months. It was a game changer for me. I felt so much better. I had also realized that I had been wearing super tight jeans, because I haven't worn shorts since high school, but I'd been wearing tight jeans. Those are my most comfortable things, and I think that it was, in a way, I was doing my own compression without realizing it. But so I'd started a GLP-1 medication, but my insurance, it would drop me, it would cover it would not cover it, I would lose weight, and then it would say you don't need it anymore. So that was a lot of a cycle. I did end up going, yes, and I also started taking the Mucinex, which for me has really made a difference. Sometimes I've run out before and forgotten, and then sort of bought it again and started taking it, and I'll lose a pound in a day or two. For me, it's very useful. But these are all conversations that I had with Connie before. And when I went to Dr. Wright's office and I saw this photo, I gasped because this was my body. It may not seem like it, but I'd never recognized my body before. And it was a big deal to see that. So I really appreciate so much that photo there, because I thought maybe I don't look like this, or I don't look like this, but I looked like that. So I was diagnosed at that time with stage 2, types 3 and 4, and the hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos. I did go to the occupational therapist who taught me the manual lymph drainage. I use compression daily. I use a vibration plate sometimes. I try to stay active. This surgery, Anthem, will only cover $250. So that, as a single parent with lots of student debt and a child about to go to college, that's not going to work for me right now, but I'm hoping that someday it might. To kind of wrap it up, one thing I think has been a different experience too is that for me, I think a lot of the hypermobility and joint pain has been my biggest issue. I'm up here sitting because I have my vertebrae, I have one slipping over the other one. I have osteoarthritis and spurs and stenosis that are compressing my L5, and so I have this pain down my leg. So these are things that are really challenging, and it's really affected my ability to be and stay active, which I need to exercise. Exercise for me is like my main antidepressant, even though I also take antidepressant. but it's so important, and I know how important it is for lipedema as well. I have kind of signs of all of these. I want to get through fast. This is just, now I can wear shorts again, but I wear compression tights with them. This, a sign of Raynaud's. I don't have the ankle cuff, but I still get, if I'm wearing socks sometimes or my sweatpants, I'll swell. Those are my corpse feet in the winter. But these are some things that I do and that work for me. I take daily antihistamines, an H1 and an H2. I'm instantly better if I wake up in the morning and drink water with electrolytes in it, exercise and compression. I really need to reduce my sugar. I know that when I cut sugar out of my diet, my joint pain is much better. Everything's better, but I love it, and it's very hard. I'm a professional quitter, but that one's tough. Also, looking at these links between neurodiversity, I know there's been some research and a couple of cross-sectional studies looking at lipedema and self-reported ADHD, another with lipedema and emotional regulation and anxiety, and then more evidence that hypermobility and lipedema, of course, co-occur, but also the relationship between neurodiversity and hypermobility. And I'm really interested in this, idea or at how autonomic dysfunction, may sometimes be misdiagnosed as ADHD, anxiety, panic disorder, and whether, that treating that autonomic dysfunction can help. I have only begun to dabble. I have not read everything yet, so please know that I would love to hear more from folks who are more experts in this area. What I'm interested in as a researcher is I would love to know more about screening and diagnosis to improve the epidemiology of lipedema. In my school, there's a really well-established kinesiology program. The only faculty that I know, a friend of mine in kinesiology, she knew all about lipedema. And I thought about ways to incorporate that into the training of these, they're training weight, I lost the word for it, weight trainers. They're training trainers. And some other folks in this area, there's also a big focus on obesity in my particular school of public health, and I'd love to get much more information about lipedema into those courses so that students are coming out knowing more about it. Links between these conditions, co-screening, can we think about when a child is diagnosed with ADHD, looking at their hypermobility and thinking about lipedema as well, and vice versa. The hormones. I'm all about inequities. All of my research is about people who are in disadvantaged situations, although our current government is putting an end to a lot of that, quite literally. Last night we got a stop order on a study. Looking at accessible treatment for people who can't access this. And as I look around the room too, most of us are, Caucasian, European and American individuals, and I know this is not who makes up lipedema. So, getting a lot more diversity as well, and looking at protective factors. And as Connie said, these are some examples of our offspring of all, and who else have these conditions and are ready to kind of go through these conversations. Some of our sisters are not. They are very clearly stated they're not interested in talking about it. But as the youngest, I'm the closest to my nieces and nephews, because some of them are closer in age to me than I am to Connie. So I think as my mom said, as the future matriarch of our family, that I feel like I will play a role too in helping some of the younger generation. We are interested in doing a survey of the descendants of Teresa Schroeder, who's our grandmother, Would love to get more, maybe partnering with the biobank or others to find funding and to make this a reality. I think that we're going to find a lot of different conditions and symptomology in our family. So that's it. I really apologize. I know we wanted to leave a lot more time for questions, but please ask us anything and reach out to us if we run out of time.
We do have a question that came in. How do you tactfully make someone aware that they may also have lipedema?
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one for sure. As an adult educator, and I do a lot of training in my corporate life, I really like to approach it from, I see you have legs like mine, is a great opening to that, but also just telling your own story and telling your story about maybe the symptoms you have. Things like, man, when I was a kid, I was bruises up and down. I mean, as my dad told me growing up, I could trip over a dangling participle. But, saying, hey, I had this and I'm now finding relief. I did actually approach someone on my vacation a couple of years ago saying, because we got to chatting as we were dining, and I said to her, I noticed that you and I are having the same experience. We're heavier women. It's really hot. We were in London during the midst of a heat wave to see a St. Louis Cardinals baseball game, as one does. And, I said to her, I really think you have the same thing that I do, and, airdropped a link to her to the Lipedema Foundation website, to the patient's guide, because it was a way I could help. So it is hard, but I think relating your own story and your own relief is the heart-to-heart way to connect to folks.
Yeah, and when Connie, I just came right out and said to Connie, I was like, do you think I have it?
And I'm like,
and she was like,
yeah.
I was like, yeah, you can just tell me, because I like being diagnosed, because there's, I had a lot of things, I'm still trying to put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. But yeah, it's having that relationship with someone first to be able, I still struggle with talking about it with my daughter, who I can see, columnar legs, but that girl loves bread. It will kill her if I tell her.
Yeah, and while my daughter is actually in the midst of working with her primary care provider in Seattle area to get a diagnosis of lipedema, she's been taking her provider through the clinician's guide to get through that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, because my daughter also said, do you think I have lipedema? I'm like, you probably do, since I do. So yeah, relationship is the biggest thing.
We had more of a comment from someone more than a question, but I wanted to share it. Someone said that they wanted to comment on the more salt comment from the third speaker, and they're sharing that they also have to have way more salt than recommended or their swelling gets bad, and was sharing that they think that more studies on that are needed. I'll add to that, Kate, as a researcher, what do you think we need to do to get some more research on that?
That's a great question. And again, because I haven't covered all of what exists yet, I'm not sure. But I mean, to me, I think that particular piece fits in with the positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome with POTS. And that, people, depending on what the cause of your POTS is, that often we need more salt than we're getting. I have a really low blood pressure and potentially low blood volume, but I don't know. I haven't had that measured. And so I feel better with that increased electrolytes and salt to bring it up. And my primary care doctor said to me at one point, I think you're the first person I have ever said this to, but I think you need to eat more salt. And one of her thinking was, because my blood pressure was so low and I don't eat animal products, so I wasn't getting that natural, I wasn't taking in a lot of sodium naturally. But I think looking at those linkages between, in this instance, I think that's Ehlers-Danlos, POTS, and lipedema, and how the co-occurrence of these conditions in the kind of the distribution of that spectrum in the population would be really interesting to know more about as well.